The galaxy trembled under the shadow of endless war. For over 6 decades, the Anvar Collective, a ruthless, hive-minded empire of conquest, had swept across the stars like a plague, consuming worlds and extinguishing resistance wherever it arose. Entire civilizations had fallen to their relentless advance, leaving the Galactic Alliance battered and desperate. Every battle seemed to end the same way, in crushing defeat, with the Anvar tightening their grip on yet another sector. But through it all, humanity had remained silent. On the Alliance's homeworld of Orenda Prime, the Great Council convened in a cavernous chamber buzzing with tension. Representatives from countless species argued heatedly, their forms as varied as their voices, glowing beings of plasma, towering insectoids, amphibious creatures with translucent skin. At the center of it all stood Commander Rylus Vaughn, a grizzled veteran whose cybernetic arm gleamed under the chamber's artificial light. His voice boomed over the chaos. "This is the end," Vaughn declared, his tone grim. "The Anvar have reached the Vrena line. If they break through, there's nothing between them and Orenda Prime. We need reinforcements. We need." "The humans," scoffed Counselor Iravac, a reptilian figure with sharp, amber eyes. "They've done nothing but sit on their isolated little planet, watching while the rest of us die." The chamber erupted in agreement, but Rylus raised his hand for silence. "Enough. The Terran Federation may have stayed out of the war, but they're still part of the Alliance. And their technology." "Technology doesn't win wars," interrupted Counselor Kaler, a crystalline being whose voice rang like a bell. "The Anvar outnumber us 1,000 to 1. No fleet, no weapon, can stand against them." Rylus's jaw tightened. "Then it's a good thing humans don't fight wars like the rest of us." The room fell silent as every eye turned toward the massive holodisplay in the center of the chamber. It showed the Anvar fleet, a massive armada of black, chitinous ships, their formations impossibly precise. Against them, the Alliance's remaining forces looked pitiful, scattered and outgunned. And then, as if on cue, the holodisplay flickered. A new fleet entered the system, its ships sleek and angular, bristling with unfamiliar weaponry. The vessels moved with eerie coordination, their matte black hulls absorbing the starlight around them. The Terrans had arrived. "They answered the call," Rylus said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "Let's see what they're capable of." Aboard the flagship Resolute, Admiral Tessa Calder surveyed the battlefield from the command deck. She was a striking figure, her presence commanding, her uniform immaculate. Her piercing green eyes studied the tactical display, taking in the massive Anvar fleet with a calm, analytical gaze. "Status report," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the bridge. Lieutenant Jackson, her second-in-command, snapped to attention. "Fleet is fully operational, Admiral. All units have reported in. The Anvar are holding formation, but their forward elements have begun probing our defenses." Tessa nodded. "As expected. They're testing us." Jackson hesitated. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted." "Why now?" he asked, gesturing to the display. "Why did we wait so long to join the fight?" Tessa's expression didn't change. "Because wars are won with strategy, Lieutenant, not sentiment. The Alliance has spent decades wearing the Anvar down, forcing them to overextend their resources. Now, we strike." Jackson frowned but said nothing. Tessa could see the doubt in his eyes, the unspoken questions. She didn't blame him. Humanity's decision to remain neutral for so long had been controversial even among their own people. But it had been necessary. "Trust me," she said quietly. "This isn't just another battle. This is the turning point." As she spoke, the display lit up with a new wave of data. The Anvar fleet was on the move, their ships advancing in perfect unison. It was an awe-inspiring sight, a vast swarm of biomechanical vessels, their chitinous hulls glinting like obsidian in the starlight. They moved with the precision of a single organism, their weapons glowing with unholy light. "They're coming," Jackson said. Tessa smiled faintly. "Good. Open a channel to the fleet." Moments later, her voice echoed across every Terran ship. "This is Admiral Calder. The Anvar think they've seen war. They think they know how to fight. Let's show them what they've been missing." The Terran fleet moved like a ghost, its ships executing precise, synchronized maneuvers that defied conventional tactics. Unlike the Alliance's sprawling formations, humanity's fleet operated as a single, cohesive unit. Every vessel was equipped with cutting-edge stealth technology and adaptive AI, allowing them to anticipate and counter enemy movements in real time. The first engagement was swift and brutal. As the Anvar launched their opening salvo, a barrage of glowing plasma bolts, the Terran ships seemed to dissolve into the void. The bolts passed harmlessly through empty space, their targets already gone. A heartbeat later, the Terrans struck back. Railgun rounds and particle lances tore through the Anvar's forward elements, ripping their ships apart with surgical precision. Explosions lit up the battlefield, casting eerie shadows over the chitinous armada. The Anvar regrouped, their hive mind reacting with terrifying speed, but the Terrans were faster. "Direct hit on their command ship," Jackson reported, his voice tinged with awe. "They're faltering." "They'll adapt," Tessa said. "But not fast enough. Begin Phase 2. Phase 2 was chaos incarnate. Terran drones, thousands of them, swarmed the battlefield like a living tide. Each drone was equipped with advanced cloaking and self-repair capabilities, making them nearly impossible to destroy. They targeted the Anvar's weak points, shield generators, propulsion systems, weapon arrays, crippling the enemy ships before they could retaliate. On the bridge of the Resolute, Tessa watched it all unfold with a sense of detached focus. This was humanity's strength, not numbers, not brute force, but adaptability. The Anvar were predictable, bound by the rigidity of their hive mind. Humanity was anything but. As the battle raged on, the Alliance forces, watching from a safe distance, were stunned into silence. Counselor Iravac, who had been so quick to dismiss humanity, could only stare at the holodisplay in disbelief. "They're winning," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're doing more than that," Rylus corrected. "They're dismantling the Anvar. Piece by piece." Back aboard the Resolute, Tessa issued her next order. "Prepare for the final push. We end this now." The Terran fleet surged forward, their weapons blazing, their drones carving a path of destruction through the heart of the Anvar armada. The tide had turned, and the Anvar, once unstoppable, were unraveling. The Anvar collective responded with a ferocity born of desperation. Their hive mind, flawless in its synchronization, adapted rapidly to the Terran assault. The remaining ships reconfigured their formations, shielding critical vessels with sacrificial drones. Biomechanical ships pulsed with alien energy, firing dense plasma waves that blanketed entire sectors of space. The galaxy's most feared war machine was digging in, and it was clear they would not fall easily. Aboard the flagship Resolute, Admiral Tessa Calder studied the tactical display as it updated with alarming speed. The Anvar's counterattack was relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. It was a level of resistance she had anticipated, but not to this degree. "They're shifting their entire formation," Lieutenant Jackson reported, his voice tense. "They've fortified their core fleet around what looks like a central nexus." Tessa's eyes narrowed. "The nexus. That's their hive mind relay." Jackson frowned. "You think it's a command ship?" "It's more than that," she replied, her tone sharp. "It's their brain. Their hive mind doesn't just operate across their fleet, it's centralized. Cut that off, and the rest will collapse." The revelation rippled across the bridge. The nexus was the key to victory, but it was also deep within enemy lines, shielded by a seemingly impenetrable wall of ships. A frontal assault would be suicide. Tessa knew she needed to think faster, smarter. She turned to the comms officer. Open a channel to the fleet. Moments later, her voice echoed across the Terran vessels. This is Calder. We've identified the Nexus as their hive mind relay. If we take it out, the Anvar fleet falls apart. But to get there, we're going to need to break their formation, and we're going to do it our way. On the battlefield, the Terran fleet adjusted immediately, their formations splintering into smaller units. Unlike the rigid, predictable movements of the Anvar, the Terrans operated with a chaotic elegance. They attacked from unexpected angles, their ships darting through gaps in the enemy's lines before disappearing into the void. Drone swarms became surgical instruments of destruction, targeting key components on the Anvar ships, shield generators, power cores, and weapon arrays. Explosions dotted the void as Terran tactics dismantled the enemy piece by piece. But the Anvar's hive mind adapted quickly, redeploying its forces to counter the Terran maneuvers. They're tightening their defense around the Nexus, Jackson reported. We're losing drones faster than they can replenish. They're outpacing us. They're outpacing the drones, Tessa corrected. But not us. She activated a secure channel to one of her specialized strike teams aboard the stealth cruiser Phantom Edge. The ship, invisible to most forms of detection, was humanity's most advanced asset for covert operations. Captain Aaron, Tessa said, her voice steady. I need you to punch a hole in their core defenses. Target the Nexus directly. On the Phantom Edge, Captain Aaron's voice came through with calm precision. Acknowledged, Admiral. We'll find you a way through. The Phantom Edge slipped through the battlefield like a ghost, its cloaking systems rendering it undetectable to the Anvar's scanners. On board, Aaron and his crew worked in practiced silence, their every move calculated and deliberate. Their objective was clear: disable the Nexus outer defenses to give the Terran fleet a fighting chance. As the stealth cruiser approached the Anvar core, the scale of the enemy fleet became truly apparent. Thousands of ships surrounded the Nexus, their chitinous hulls glowing with alien energy. It was a fortress, and they were a single ship. We're in position, Aaron said. Activating disruption pulse. The Phantom Edge unleashed a burst of electromagnetic energy, scrambling the systems of nearby Anvar vessels. For a brief moment, the defensive wall around the Nexus flickered, creating a window of opportunity. Back on the Resolute, Tessa saw the opening and didn't hesitate. All units, focus fire on the Nexus. This is our chance. The Terran fleet surged forward, their weapons blazing. Railgun slugs and plasma lances tore through the weakened defenses, carving a path toward the Nexus. But the Anvar responded with brutal efficiency, redirecting their remaining forces to plug the gap. They're regrouping, Jackson warned. We're not going to hold this corridor for long. Tessa's mind raced. She needed a way to neutralize the Nexus before the window closed entirely. Her gaze fell on the display of Terran forces, and an idea began to take shape, a risky, unorthodox maneuver that only humanity would attempt. Send the signal to the Havoc, she ordered. Jackson blinked. The Havoc? But that's an experimental weapon, Tessa finished. And the Anvar won't see it coming. The Havoc was an enigma even among the Terran fleet. A hybrid warship equipped with cutting-edge experimental tech, it carried a weapon designed to destabilize energy fields on a massive scale. It was a gamble. A single shot could either disable the Nexus entirely or destabilize the surrounding fleet. But Tessa knew it was their best shot. The Havoc entered the fray, its sleek, angular hull bristling with untested technology. On its bridge, Captain Darian Strath prepared his crew for what might be their final mission. Target the Nexus, Darian ordered. Charge the destabilizer. Let's make history. The ship's weapon systems hummed with energy as the destabilizer began to charge. Around them, the Terran fleet fought desperately to keep the Anvar at bay, their smaller ships sacrificing themselves to protect the Havoc's approach. The Anvar hive mind seemed to sense the threat. Their ships swarmed toward the Havoc, their plasma cannons blazing. The ship shuddered under the assault, but Darien and his crew held firm. Destabilizer at 90%, the weapons officer reported. 10 seconds to full charge. Hold steady, Darien said, his voice calm despite the chaos. And fire on my mark. On the Resolute, Tessa watched the display with bated breath. The Havoc reached full charge, and for a single, heart-stopping moment, the entire battlefield seemed to pause. Fire, Darien said. The Havoc unleashed its weapon, a massive pulse of energy that rippled through the void. The Nexus, already weakened by the Terran assault, faltered as its energy fields collapsed. The surrounding Anvar ships spun out of formation, their systems overloaded by the destabilizer's effects. They're breaking apart. Jackson shouted, his voice filled with awe. The Nexus is collapsing. The once impenetrable hive mind fractured as the Nexus erupted in a cataclysmic explosion. Anvar ships lost their synchronization, their movements erratic and disorganized. The Terran fleet wasted no time, pressing the attack and tearing through the remaining forces with ruthless precision. As the battle neared its conclusion, Tessa allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The Anvar's greatest strength, their hive mind, had been their undoing. Humanity's adaptability, their ability to think and fight in ways no other species could, had turned the tide. Victory in sight, Jackson said, his voice filled with relief. Tessa nodded. Not yet. Let's finish the job. The Anvar fleet was in chaos. Their once coordinated movements, orchestrated by the hive mind through the Nexus, had devolved into disjointed, panicked reactions. Ships veered off course, colliding with one another as their systems overloaded. The Terran fleet pressed its advantage, dismantling the enemy one piece at a time. Explosions rippled across the void, lighting up the battlefield like a star-gone supernova. Aboard the Resolute, Admiral Tessa Calder stood motionless for a moment, her piercing green eyes locked on the tactical display. The Havoc's destabilizer had done its job, and now the Anvar were vulnerable. But the battle was far from over. The enemy still outnumbered them, and desperation had made them unpredictable. Status report, Tessa ordered, her voice sharp. Lieutenant Jackson scanned the data streaming across his console. The Nexus is destroyed, ma'am. Their hive-mind connection is severed. Most of their fleet is crippled, but the remaining ships are regrouping around a secondary command node. Secondary command node? Tessa frowned. The Nexus was their brain. What could they possibly use to coordinate now? Jackson's brow furrowed as he analyzed the readings. It's biological, Admiral. Some kind of central organism embedded within their fleet. The Anvar must have a fallback system, a queen, maybe, or a command organism acting independently. Tessa's jaw tightened. So even without the Nexus, they still have a way to rally. And if we don't neutralize it now? They'll adapt, Jackson finished grimly. Tessa nodded. Then we take it out. Get me Captain Strath on the Havoc. Aboard the Havoc, Captain Darien Strath listened to the Admiral's orders with grim resolve. The ship's experimental destabilizer was offline, its energy reserves depleted from the previous strike. They'd bought the fleet precious time, but now they would have to rely on traditional means to finish the job. Understood, Admiral, Darien said. We'll find the command node. You don't need to find it, Tessa replied, her tone cold and deliberate. I'm sending you the coordinates. Take your team and board the organism directly. Darien blinked, momentarily taken aback. Board it? You're asking us to land on a living Anvar structure. That's exactly what I'm asking, Tessa said. This isn't a command ship, it's an organic entity. Conventional weapons might not work, but if you can disable it from the inside, the rest of their fleet will collapse. Darien hesitated, then nodded. We'll make it happen. The Havoc broke formation, weaving through the debris field as it approached the coordinates. The command node was a grotesque, pulsating mass of bioluminescent flesh, bristling with spines and tendrils that lashed out at anything nearby. It was surrounded by a protective escort of Anvar ships, but the Terran fleet moved to intercept, drawing fire away from the havoc. Inside the ship's launch bay, Darien and his strike team prepared for the mission. Clad in reinforced exosuits equipped with adaptive shielding, they looked like modern-day knights ready to slay a dragon. The tension was palpable, but their resolve was unshakable. "You all know the stakes," Darien said, his voice firm. "This isn't just another mission. If we fail, the Anvar regroup, and this war drags on for decades. But if we succeed, it ends here. Let's get it done." The team boarded a dropship, its engines roaring as it launched from the havoc and streaked toward the command node. On the bridge of the Resolute, Tessa watched the tiny vessel's progress with a mix of pride and apprehension. "They'll make it," Jackson said, as if trying to reassure himself as much as the admiral. "They have to," Tessa replied. "For all our sakes." The dropship dodged tendrils of energy that lashed out from the command node, its pilot weaving through the defensive barrage with expert precision. Finally, it landed on the surface of the organism, its magnetic clamps anchoring it in place. The strike team disembarked, their boots sinking slightly into the fleshy terrain. The air was thick with an acrid stench, and the ground pulsed beneath their feet like a living heartbeat. "Stay sharp," Darien said, his voice crackling over the comms. "We don't know what we're walking into." The team advanced cautiously, their weapons raised. The surface of the command node was a labyrinth of organic tunnels and chambers, illuminated by an eerie, phosphorescent glow. Strange, chittering sounds echoed through the corridors, growing louder with every step. "Contact," one of the soldiers shouted as a swarm of Anvar drones emerged from the shadows. The creatures were smaller than their shipborne counterparts but just as deadly, their serrated limbs glinting in the dim light. The team opened fire, their plasma rifles cutting through the drones with searing bursts of energy. The fight was brutal and claustrophobic, the narrow tunnels amplifying the chaos. But the Terrans pressed forward, their determination unyielding. Darien checked his scanner, his eyes narrowing as he pinpointed the command center's location. "We're close. Push through." The team emerged into a massive central chamber, dominated by a towering, pulsating mass of tissue that throbbed with an unnatural light. This was the heart of the command node, the organism that had taken over coordination after the Nexus's destruction. Tendrils extended from its core, connecting to smaller nodes scattered throughout the chamber. Darien's voice was calm but urgent. "Silva, plant the charges. We're blowing this thing sky high." The engineer nodded, her hands moving quickly as she set up the explosive devices. The rest of the team held their ground, fending off waves of drones that swarmed into the chamber. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning flesh, but they held their line. "Charges set," Silva shouted. "We've got 2 minutes. Fall back," Darien ordered. "Move, move, move." The team retreated the way they had come, fighting every step of the way as more drones poured into the tunnels. The ground shook violently as the charges detonated, the explosion ripping through the command node and sending shockwaves through the Anvar fleet. On the Resolute, Tessa watched as the remaining Anvar ships faltered. Their movements became erratic, disorganized. Without the Nexus or the command node, they were little more than aimless drones. "It's working," Jackson said, his voice filled with awe. "They're breaking apart." Tessa nodded, her expression hard. "Order the fleet to mop up the stragglers. Let's finish this." As the Terran ships moved in for the kill, the battlefield fell eerily quiet. The Anvar, once an unstoppable force, were no more. For the first time in decades, the galaxy was free from their grip. On the bridge, Tessa allowed herself a rare smile. "Mission accomplished," she said softly. But in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had proven its strength, but the galaxy was vast, and there were always new challenges on the horizon. The remnants of the Anvar fleet drifted aimlessly through space, their once mighty armada reduced to scattered wreckage and powerless vessels. Without the nexus and the command node, their hive-mind connection was severed. What remained of the Anvar forces was little more than uncoordinated fragments, vulnerable and broken. Aboard the Resolute, Admiral Tessa Calder surveyed the battlefield with a sense of grim satisfaction. The Terran fleet had achieved the impossible, dismantling the most feared force in the galaxy in a matter of hours. But the weight of the cost lingered, visible in the weary expressions of her crew and the damage to their ships. "Lieutenant Jackson," Tessa said, her voice steady. "Status report." Jackson scanned his console, the glow of the displays reflecting in his tired eyes. "Enemy forces are neutralized, Admiral. Remaining Anvar ships are in retreat, and our fleet is consolidating. The strike team has successfully extracted from the command node. Casualty reports are coming in now." Tessa nodded, her expression hardening. "And the fleet?" Jackson hesitated. "We've lost 27% of our ships, with another 32% heavily damaged. Most of the drones are gone, but the Havoc and Phantom Edge are still operational." A heavy silence filled the bridge. The Terrans had won a decisive victory, but it hadn't come without sacrifice. "Send word to the fleet," Tessa said. "Priority is rescue and recovery. Gather the survivors and secure the wreckage. The Alliance will want proof of what we've done here." On the Alliance's homeworld of Orenda Prime, the Great Council chamber was packed with representatives from across the galaxy. Holodisplays projected live feeds of the battlefield, showing the shattered remains of the Anvar fleet and the victorious Terran forces. The room was abuzz with disbelief and awe, the cacophony of alien voices blending into a single, overwhelming hum. They did it," Counselor Iravac said, his sharp amber eyes fixed on the display. The reptilian representative, who had been one of humanity's harshest critics, now looked stunned. "The Terrans actually defeated the Anvar." "They didn't just defeat them," Commander Rylas Vaughn said, his grizzled face breaking into a rare smile. "They destroyed them. In hours." Counselor Kaler, the crystalline figure who had dismissed the Terrans as irrelevant, was silent for a moment before speaking. "It is unprecedented. Decades of war, and they ended it in a single engagement." The murmurs grew louder, and the chamber erupted into cheers and applause. The Alliance had been given a second chance, a future they had all but given up on. And it was humanity that had delivered it. Back aboard the Resolute, the mood was subdued. The crew worked tirelessly to assess the damage and prepare for the next steps. Tessa stood on the observation deck, gazing out at the stars. The aftermath of the battle was a stark reminder of the cost of war, but it was also a testament to humanity's resilience. Behind her, Lieutenant Jackson approached, his steps hesitant. "Admiral, the Alliance is requesting a debrief. They want to know how we did it." Tessa didn't turn, her eyes still fixed on the void. "Tell them we did what needed to be done." Jackson hesitated. "They're hailing us directly. The entire council is watching." Tessa sighed, then straightened her uniform and turned to face the comms panel. "Patch them through." The holographic image of the Great Council chamber flickered to life, the faces of hundreds of alien representatives staring back at her. Rylas Vaughn stood at the forefront, his expression a mix of respect and curiosity. "Admiral Calder," he said, his voice resonating through the chamber. "On behalf of the Galactic Alliance, we owe you a debt we can never repay. Your fleet has done what we believed impossible. The Anvar Collective is no more." Tessa inclined her head slightly. "The victory wasn't ours alone, Commander Vaughn. The Alliance fought for decades to weaken the Anvar. We simply delivered the final blow." "You delivered much more than that," Vaughn said. "You've shown us a new way to fight, a new way to think. Your tactics, your strategies, they were unlike anything we've ever seen." Counselor Iravac leaned forward, his sharp features betraying a mix of gratitude and caution. "Your methods were unconventional. Some might even say ruthless. But they were effective. How do you explain it, Admiral? Tessa's gaze was steady. Humanity has spent most of its history learning to fight for survival. We've faced extinction, war, and chaos on our homeworld, and we adapted. The Anvar's strength was their predictability, their hive mind made them efficient but rigid. We exploited that. War isn't about fairness, counselors. It's about winning. The chamber fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Then Rylus spoke again. What's next, Admiral? The Anvar are defeated, but the galaxy is still in disarray. What role does humanity see for itself now? Tessa's expression softened, a faint smile playing at her lips. Humanity has no desire to conquer or dominate. We've seen enough of war to know its cost. But we will stand with the Alliance, not as its savior, but as its ally. Together, we can rebuild. In the following weeks, the news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy. For the first time in decades, there was hope. The Anvar Collective, once thought invincible, was gone. Refugees began to return to their liberated worlds, and the Alliance worked to rebuild what had been lost. But for humanity, the victory was bittersweet. On Earth and across the Terran colonies, memorials were held for those who had given their lives in the battle. The names of the fallen were etched into monuments, a reminder of the price of freedom. Admiral Tessa Calder returned to Earth to deliver a speech before the United Terran Assembly. Standing before a crowd of thousands, she spoke not of triumph, but of responsibility. This was not a war we wanted, she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. But it was a war we needed to fight. Not just for humanity, but for every species that calls this galaxy home. We have proven what we are capable of, but let this victory serve as a warning as well. We must never forget the cost of conflict, and we must never stop striving for peace. The crowd erupted into applause, but Tessa's mind was already on the future. The galaxy was vast, and though the Anvar were defeated, she knew other threats would eventually arise. But humanity was ready. For the first time in its history, Earth was not alone. The Terrans were part of something greater, a united galaxy, forged in the fires of war, but with a future built on the hope of peace.